Hey guys, welcome to my session on Coffee with Prabh. And today we have a special guest, Mr. Ross. Ross Yong is a CISO in residence and the creator of OWASP Threat Safeguard Metrics. And Ross has worn every cyber hat imaginable, like former CISO of Caterpillar Financials, DevSecOps leads for the Federal Reserve, and the security engineer at CIA. He now advises startups and Fortune 500 boards on turning the cloud build pipeline into threat-informed, risk-driven program. And he also co-hosts the popular CISO Tradecraft podcast, which helping the next generation translate the technical win into the board level success. So Ross, welcome to the show and thank you so much for taking out the time for this particular podcast. We're really, really grateful for your insights on the topics, the things that we share on LinkedIn.
Of course, it's my pleasure to be here.
So thanks, Ross. And Ross, today I want to discuss about one of the most important topic, which is there's a lot of buzzword around secure generative AI or generative AI. Before we jump into the actual podcast, because today podcast we're going to discuss about, um, you know, how to safeguard the security generative AI with pipelines and how we can use a threat safeguard matrix, which CISO can also use that. So I want to understand what is secure generative AI. If I want to explain to the business, so what is secure generative AI and how it is important from a CISO perspective? And I will be your first student who going to make a lot of notes.
Yeah, so here's the biggest thing I will say. Software development is changing significantly from how it has been for the last 30 years.
Hmm.
For the last 30 years, what we had is a developer who had a project, go build this website, and they would go and they would write the code to build that website. Maybe they would even, look for, something online and they would find, oh, here's how to write that function.
Hmm.
But now developers aren't the ones writing code anymore. They're asking Claude, they're asking ChatGPT, Cursor, Windsurf, GitHub Copilot, whatever the tool, to say, go build me this website. And then it spits the code back. And this transforms how we do software. Because here's the thing, developers will now become prompt engineers instead
Hmm.
of coders. They won't know how to write JavaScript and all the intricate libraries anymore. They're going to know how to query the prompt in a way to get the best output. And so this is going to make things very different because developers aren't going to know where the vulnerabilities are in the code anymore. They're also not going to know, does this comply with regulations that are there because they didn't write the code. And so we're going to have to start thinking about this AI generated code from a security perspective, from a compliance perspective, and from a data privacy perspective, because auditors are going to say, how do I know this AI wrote the code in a way that was better than the dumbest developers I'm used to seeing code from, right? And that big change is something that our whole industry is really going to have to look at if we want to get code right going forward.
Exactly, and that's why there's a lot of news regarding vibe coding, where
Yeah.
we're using a generative AI to write a code and there's no validations, there is no review. And that's why, recently we don't need to take the name of the companies, but a lot of companies, even in India, one of the dating site got hacked because of that reason. So they did the wipe coding and hackers basically exploit that and boom. And it was creating a great impact on the trust. And but when it comes to Ross, we talk about ChatGPT, we enter the queries, we have a lot of LLM injections and all that. We talk about a lot of hallucinations of the data and all that. So how this is important from CISO?
Yeah. So imagine I'm a CISO today and I'm used to the IT department who builds software.
Hmm.
Well, there's usually standardized processes. You have to go talk to the architects. You have to do design reviews. You have to, do these network firewall changes in order to get access to the internet and all these things. This is really changing in our environment today. And I'll just give you an example.
Hmm.
Let's say you have someone in your marketing team today who has access to Salesforce, your CRM tool, because that's what they do. They need to be able to find the customers that they can better market to. And they say, oh, let me go and start vibe coding on the weekend because I learned from some friends at a hackathon over the weekend. They didn't go to any computer science programming school. They don't know what the standards are. They don't know what your best practices are, the regulations, but they have access to the data. They have
Hmm.
access to Salesforce. What can they build with those roles? And maybe they build it in a Power BI app because you have Office 365 available, right? All of these things, really little oversight, especially when a lot of our data is hosted in third-party SaaS tools where we don't have really good logging, we don't have security agents on those things, and we're just going to see this really take off in ways that we struggle to govern today.
Okay. And that's the reason we say we need to have a lot of controls around the AI output and all that. And that's why we can say CISO has to also upgrade on the AI and other solutions on a high level.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you, for better or for worse, CISOs are kind of like the one person who is expected to get all of the security right for a
Hmm.
company. I
Hmm.
think we can all agree it's not in their control, but generally when people are like, aren't you supposed to be in charge of cybersecurity? Even if you have no idea that this is what the developers are building or expanding onto. So, CISOs are going to have tools to police the shadow AI and shadow applications across their organization. They're going to have better data security posture management and data loss prevention to understand where this data is being sent to in the cloud and in their environments and any other vibe coded created app. And at the same time, they're also going to have to perform all the application security scanning on all of these new technologies like
Hmm.
MCPs. Well, do I even have a tool that can scan an MCP today? Probably not. What about agents? Do you know how to check a model in agents to make sure it didn't use any heuristics that are legal, immoral, or unethical? Probably not my SaaS tool either. So I'm really at a loss for where we're going to find these capabilities in the next 6 months. And it's really where we're seeing the new cutting edge startups start to anticipate this future demand signal and start to build the next generation of technologies.
Excellent. And that is the reason, we have seen a lot of programs on CISOs and all that. They start adding this generative AI and AI security controls in their sessions. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, yeah, we're seeing a lot of companies look at AI from a number of different ways.
Hmm.
Some of the traditional ways is how do we look for data loss prevention? Someone's going to ChatGPT. How do we make sure, intellectual property isn't going out? Or how do we start to scan the models or websites? So if I build a chatbot website today, maybe I can scan it with 500 inputs.
Hmm.
200 should come through and I should get responses, and 300 should say this is an improper request. I shouldn't respond and teach you how to build, a bomb or, give you every social security number of all of our customers. There's going to be
Hmm.
responses that the LLM and chatbot should just block. And so we're seeing a lot of things to fuzz those technologies in that space today.
Excellent. And that's the reason you said, doing the security by design and privacy by design when you're building a generative AI, it's also very important. But on the other side, MCP is also creating a lot of trends. So there are some viewers who are new to this topic of MCP. So can you just light on what is MCP in a more simpler manner if I want to explain to the business team?
Yeah, so MCP or Model Context Protocol is like
Hmm.
a better version of an API, an application programming interface. Think of it
Okay.
as the following. I build an application or a website
Uh,
and I want to expose some functionality so somebody can query, the database behind it and use that data. Usually I did this in an API call. And I would do some type of request where it's essentially a CRUD, create, read, update, or delete, where you're saying, hey, give me this data, and then I'll respond back after you've already authenticated. What they're trying to do is standardize that across every application in a consistent way. So instead of like learning how to do a custom API call on your website, I can just go to a major website, let's call it like Zapier or Crew.ai or Tines or something like that, that has integrations with thousands of vendors, and I plug and play in a very consistent way.
hmm.
The idea being that if more people can plug into your tools in a consistent environment, one, you'd get more customers, but two, you could start to agentify things, which means instead of a customer having to go into a web page to book an airplane, we could have an agent where the customer just says, hey, I need a flight on this day at this time within this price. And then it just kind of auto schedules all of that behind the scenes with the customer's credit card information. And they just trust that it gets handled. So this evolution of MCP looks very, very promising to increase business prospects. However, the thing with any new technology is it also introduces new risks. We've seen examples where people have created new MCPs, which ultimately, leaked credentials, lost data, gave root access on systems. And so with any new technology, we increase capability, but we also increase risk exposure.
Exactly. And that's why we say anything which is created to create some kind of a convenience for the user, it can become a threat for the user. Wi-Fi is a best example. It give you a functionality that you can access your internet from anywhere within the house. But same Wi-Fi can become a threat because hacker can also intercept the same signals. Same with MCP also. There's a lot of free APIs are available, but not necessarily every free API is a good API for you. So there's no free lunch, right, Ross?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think you called it pretty fairly there.
And you and thanks for sharing the input on that. So there's a lot of buzzword around your work you did in called TSM,
Hmm.
which is called as a threat and safeguard matrix. And I'm sure pretty much it is basically in the initial stage where people are aware about, but not everyone. Personally, when I heard first time your work on that area is really really amazing, and I'm sure after this podcast, a lot of talks will be around this concept. So, what is this threat and safeguard matrix that you have built, and how this can be useful, and what was the thought behind this process? What make you to go for this TSM? A lot of people are doing, let me talk about AI, LLM hijacking, LLM injections, and all that. Then Mr. Ross, on a separate side, he was working on something else, which is basically a long term solution, TSM matrix. So, what is exactly this threat and safeguard matrix, and how it basically work, and how it can be useful?
Yeah, so the OWASP Threat and Safeguard Matrix, or TASM, I pronounce it like the Tasmanian devil,
TASM.
and you'll see the little icon of the Tasmanian
Yeah,
devil,
yeah,
is a framework where what you do is you list your material threats on the one side of a matrix. Think of like where the horizontal is. And then on the vertical slices, you put in the NIST five functions from the cybersecurity framework of identify, protect, detect, respond, recover.
yeah.
Let me just
Govern
give
also
you an
there. Yeah.
example of this, right? I'm worried about people in my company becoming phished to business email compromise type emails that come in because you see this example costing thousands of dollars, millions of dollars when companies get this wrong. So, what would I do? I'd want to identify who are my users who, if they were phished, could authorize a procurement request that would go bad for me. And then how would I protect that? Well, maybe I can't actually change any bank account numbers or make a payment unless it goes through an authorized system where I already have these contract changes in a very standardized way. That could be a process way to protect things.
Hmm.
And then how would I detect things? Like the attack already happened, I've lost the money, or I've sent the data over, and maybe I'm in that 3 day window when I can claw back the money from an ACH transfer. Well, here, maybe somebody has to review all outgoing payments, whether on that day, that week, that month, and we look for things. And then how would we, respond and recover? Well, as part of my incident response, I might call my cyber insurance provider and say, I just got scammed out of $50,000. I pay to have coverage in my cyber insurance. Can you fix this? And, maybe what are the workarounds I need to change in my processes to make this not happen again? And then finally, the recover page is what am I going to do long term to making sure that this becomes, something that's not going to happen again. Maybe we change the training for all approvers in the system so that any changes on contracts happen a certain way, require a certain 2-person, 3-person approval system to prevent these things from happening. So this is essentially how you can build a defense in depth plan according to each of your material threats. And it doesn't just have to be cyber threats. It can be AI threats. It can be HR threats. It can be finance, tariff issues. It's very extensible and you can use it in a lot of ways, including your executive risk committees.
Okay. So like the way we have a threat modeling framework like Stride or Pasta, where we mapping spoofing, tampering, reputation, information disclosures and all that. So here, if I'm corrected this wrong is in this ways. So we have this AI. This is the TSM model, and we map every actions with the TSM modules. Can we say like that?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the concept of Stride. I actually talk about how you can use the TASM to standardize our threat models.
Hmm.
And I'll just give you an example. Let's say we have 100 application teams and they do 100 threat models. How do I find the similarities between each of the threat models to say this one risk appears in 40 out of the 100 threat models that we've done?
Exactly. Hmm.
And we need to solve at an enterprise level. Maybe we have bad enterprise logging and monitoring across all of our apps. Well, one of the things you can do is you can put in under the threat side spoofing, right? And you can think about here's my application. How would I identify where in the app it could be spoofed? How would I protect or stop that? How would I detect, respond, and recover? And now, as you use that across 100 different applications, you're going to see the same things come up for ways to protect or ways to detect. And as you do that, you can say, it looks like we have an enterprise problem that if we solved here at an enterprise level, now we fix it really well for so many teams. And so I think this is one of the ways that it scales threat modeling. It improves risk committees to look at the larger trends across an organization.
And it is an open source project that you build, right? I think anyone can basically use that and he can integrate with his existing projects. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, you can go to the website. It's on OWASP.org. And if you just search for OWASP TASM, the Threat and Safeguard Matrix, you can find it. You can read about it. I have a section at the top with some tabs where it says media, and you can see some of the PowerPoints that I have. I've created Miro boards in case you want to work on that together with your team virtually. So it's very usable and free. So don't feel like you have to spend $300,000 to buy this new product, right?
Excellent. And can you help me out with mapping the real LLM threats step by step in a practical way with TASM safeguards? Like we're taking example of prompt injections.
Yeah. So let's take the example of prompt injections here. And let's maybe break it down into something very, very specific.
Yeah.
Maybe we're worried about sensitive data leaks from prompt injections,
Yeah.
right? So people in my company use ChatGPT to, type better emails.
Hmm.
I might be worried about people uploading a sensitive document so that they can reword it and make it sound professional or more friendly tone. How would I identify where that could happen? Right? Maybe I have some network logs coming from Zscaler where I could see all the different solutions and third party SaaS where this could happen. Now, once I know where that data is happening, now I want to protect it. I don't want my intellectual property to go on this site. Usually, what that means is I have to have some type of data loss protection system that goes from an intrusion detection based approach to an intrusion prevention. So it's looking at the data to say, oh, I just asked ChatGPT, what's the weather like? Boring. That can go through. Oh, I asked ChatGPT to analyze, next quarter's financial numbers. Whoa, that's not really good. That sounds like intellectual property. We should probably block that request.
Agree.
So we go through the framework and we look for these identify, protect, detect steps. And then for the prompt injection, we would look for specific things to say, maybe I asked this query, but it's modifying the query to do things that I don't want it to have happen. And what would I do around that? Would I validate the data? Would I bring that model internal? What are the ways I would want to protect and detect these things are occurring?
Okay. And we can basically but as I said, we don't have access to chat GPT and all that internal logics and all that. So if I am building my we cannot control chat GPT because these are the closed source modules we have. So in that case, how can we integrate?
So I think we have to be realistic with things,
Hmm.
right? If I go in the organization and I just use a web proxy to block ChatGPT,
Hmm.
I think my developers are pretty smart. They're probably going to find a way to sneaker net the data around to
Yeah.
still use ChatGPT. They're going to use it on their personal laptops, on their phones, and then they're just going to send an email with the response to themselves and get it past the firewalls, right? They'll find a way. So I think the answer isn't about how do we just block all these things from happening. We have to look to say, how can I allow you to use this within prescribed limits to help you while also trying to protect the data? And this is where we're seeing next gen tools like Lumia in this space really help organizations. Uh, Now, I understand not every company will be able to buy a new tool. Maybe you are just cash poor and living below the security poverty line, if you will. At this point in time, this is where risk-based trade-offs are made. What is more important to you, being productive or having really good security?
Hmm.
And those will be the decisions that organizational leadership teams are going to have to make.
And that's the reason, because one of the biggest concern for the people, if you talk about enterprises, they want to balance between the functionality versus security or usability versus security. On one side, ChatGPT definitely or AI is using to enhance the productivity, but this is where we need to correct me if I'm wrong, Ross. Like, we need to know the where we need to stop it. It's very important. We need to have a clarity about why we are using AI, for what we are using AI, and how the data is going to be used in AI. So when we have these kind of a metrics in place, I think in that case we can able to materialize our controls and we can able to balance the security and functionality. What is your approach on that? Like, is it true or like it's just
I
very
think this
important
is
to know
right.
why? Yeah. Hmm.
I think this is right. Like historically, we go down a risk approval, risk registry way where we say, show
Yeah.
me the likelihood of the attack and the impact, and then
Mm.
we make some risk-based decision.
True.
But the problem with that approach is we're always missing the one thing that's so important. What is the upside of using this technology?
Yeah.
And I'll just give you an example. If I told you the real cost of using Chat GPT was $4 million,
Hmm.
somebody may say, I don't like that risk. I don't want to accept it. But
Hmm.
what if I told you the productivity increase was $4 billion? Would you accept a $4 million risk to
I
enable
don't think so.
$4 billion of revenue to your company?
I don't think
Of
so.
course, any day of the
Yeah.
week, any day of the week, I would make that decision. I wouldn't even blink. So we have to look at the upside as well as the downside. And then maybe we're going to go and say, well, if we were going to make $4 billion, it makes sense to spend 500K to reduce this $4 million risk to $200,000. And then we both win. But you have to always look at the upside and not just the risk, likelihood and risk impact.
And that's why we our why should be clear, why we are using AI instead of how we're going to use AI, like your Simon's methods and all that. And thanks for sharing that insight on the controls part and all that. So we got your TSM metrics in hand, and where do you slip these checks into CI/CD pipelines? Because we have a lot of integrations with APIs and all that, and now we are working on the microservices and DevOps. So how do you see, where do you place the first specific AI specific control in CI/CD pipeline?
So let's take some examples of what are some risks that you're looking for.
Hmm.
Maybe I'm really worried about hallucinations from my chatbot. I don't want my chatbot, which is customer facing, to make stuff up and make me liable for these things I'm telling customers, which are simply untrue.
Hmm.
What I would do is I would say, well, I'm really worried about this protect phase of this material threat. What do I do for acceptance testing? Right? I'm going to give it sample user inputs and I expect these to come through and I accept these things to be blocked. And if they're not blocked, then we need to go and retune the chatbot.
True.
And you run that as an automated script on every code change and code release. And so if we go into version 3 of the chatbot and I run those same tests and I saw, hey, we used to have 90% accuracy and now we're down to 70% accuracy going forward. It's kind of one of those, aha WTF moments where you're like, I think we need to fix this. And then we need to go and retune the model. And
Yeah.
it needs to be able to be defendable. Like you should be able to say, this isn't going to be perfect. Obviously, no customer service representative is 100% accurate either. But is this at least better than the average human? And if it
Hmm.
is, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, right? If we are making better improvements, this is still goodness to do. But we always want some way to kind of just measure every time we do a change to making sure we have some level of quality, right?
Okay. Do you recommend any some of the controls along with that, very generic controls we can have for the CI/CD pipeline?
Yeah, so an example of a company that I see in this space is Encrypt AI. You can give them your website, your models, your LLMs, and they will scan to show your compliance against OWASP, to show your compliance against NIST and ISO and other standards. And then you'd have something here that you could use in your organization. There may be other ones that you're looking at, scanning the models as
Hmm.
well. We're starting to just see so many brand new vendors in this space, and to be honest, I can't remember the names of all these companies I've heard a pitch one time from.
Okay. And do you recommend any tools, open source tool for detecting the AI issues? Like,
I haven't seen tools in this space. Mostly what I've seen are Israeli startups.
hmm.
There may be some open source tools in this space. I'm just not knowledgeable to give you a good answer.
Okay, thanks. Thank you so much. And it's a very interesting question I want to ask because I think that reflects the maturity of the framework. You know how this TASM is aligned with the NIST AI RMF, as you know, which creating a lot of buzzword. And as you know, the European is accepting this AI Act and all that. So how do you see this framework is aligning with AI risk RMF and sorry, NIST AI RMF and EU AI Act, EU AI Act. Sorry, yeah.
So, what I liked about this is it's really a simplified way to build a defense in depth strategy. And I'll just give you an example. If you were to go to NIST and look at 171, you would see, something like 100 plus controls
Agree.
that you'd have to go do. And even if you scanned your organization and said, we met all 120 controls, that really doesn't tell you much about how you can stop threats in your company. This is a completely different approach. We say take material threats that can harm your company and show me how you would identify where this could happen, stop this thing from occurring, detect if it had occurred, and then respond and recover. And not only that, but we also have a govern function, which I actually use metrics. And you can see the example on the OWASP website of creating a cyber report card
Yeah.
where what you do is you say, "Oh, I'm worried about a specific threat. Maybe I'm worried about uh, let's just call it ransomware attacks in my organization." Well, I'm going to have a metric which says, "Hey, what percentage of my critical applications have read-only backups where I can fully restore in less than 24 hours?" And then I test that on a monthly or quarterly basis and show, hey, did 100% of my 200 apps back up in that 24 hours? Or maybe only 70% did. And so now I know what the business disruption is going to be around ransomware when these apps are unlikely to restore from these read only backups. So it's a framework that you can put any of these threads, and it simplifies an understanding of how well we're protected against any AI threat or any threat that is material in nature.
Excellent. And that's why, we always preferred, okay, I think nowadays we follow one of the framework also called threat by design. So during an understanding of requirement of products and all that, it is always good to have the, possible threats to be documented because if you identify the latest, it will be more expensive. And I really appreciate the way you have built this framework because, EU AI Act is something which can be nightmare for a lot of product companies because it's not only applicable for the EU, but even the non-EU companies like companies based out in US, Asia, India, China, whatever. If they're planning to sell any AI solutions to EU, they need to be comply with that. And it's not something a small regulation. It's a Brussels effects, they say. So one thing I like about this framework is how we are predicting our threats, materializing our threats, so that we can reduce the liability from this AI Act. And that's the reason I asked this question. And but do you receive any kind of a inputs on, or do you receive any kind of a questions around, the challenges what they face when they're using this framework, TASM framework, with integrating with AI Act and all that?
So the biggest thing I think is there's just a learning of how do I use this framework for the first time within my organization.
Hmm.
And take, for example, the EU AI Act, which goes into effect of August of 2026.
Yeah.
There's going to be things in that EU AI Act that says, show me bias testing. Essentially, let's just think we're going to have things and models that are going to be not good for people. I'll just give you an example. Maybe you are a bank and you give loans to people so that they can do home mortgages, right? And maybe your training data learns that if you are African American or Hispanic, you are less likely to pay off your loan. It would be illegal to use that as a criteria on giving loans because of different laws that have been passed.
Hmm.
And so you need to analyze your code to making sure you're not using those protected class fields to ensuring that harm would happen from your code. So
True.
these are things that you're not going to find a SaaS tool or an SCA tool finding those vulnerabilities in your code. We're going to need new tools to look at our code to analyze these things for this bias field liability that could happen if somebody, did a lawsuit on our company for why this loan wasn't, happening at a larger perspective. And
Hmm.
this comes up. It comes up frequently when auditors and regulators find that this data sets, which we've trained in California and San Francisco, don't really work well when you're scaling across the EU citizens or people in Africa and other areas. So I think this is just an area that is ripe for innovation because we're just going to see a lot of a big need to satisfy some of these new regulations.
And Ross, do you know, like, I was doing a little bit research on your framework. Uh, the one thing which is very, very attractive and a turning point of this framework is in EU AI, there is a category we called as a high risk AI solutions. So EU has mandate, we need to document the risk treatment. And your TASM, I'm sure I have pronounced correct. TASM basically meet that by showing a control mapping.
I think this is really key. That it always surprised me when I said, "Let's look at our material risk to the company," and these are
Yeah.
$10 million plus risks.
Hmm.
And all we have is like a three paragraph, or I'm sorry, a three sentence response of how we're going to reduce the risk.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, if the US is going to battle versus Russia, and we don't just have like three sentences of how we're going to stop the Russian attack, you're going to actually build a defense in depth plan that you say, well, here's how we would respond. And I think you need to do the same thing for your company. Think
Yeah.
about the series of controls that are going to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover for your organization. And it doesn't take that long to go through these things. If anybody is interested, please give me a call. I'm happy to show just how fast we can build these for your organization. And then when you spend that little bit of time, you're going to see things that are really, really interesting. So, for example, in the AI space, somebody's like, oh, we need to solve and protect against all the AI risks. Well, the way you solve sensitive data leaks is very different than the way you solve hallucinations, which is very different from the way you do bias field liability. And
Exactly.
so you have to understand how the controls are going to be in place to stop these material risks because they may be very different programs, very different processes, very different technologies that you have to deploy in order to protect your organization's revenue.
And that's why, one of the Article 10 of EU AI, which talk about the data governance and bias. And, in TASM, they have list the data quality safeguard, like, data provenance, check DP and all that. And when it comes to technical documentation, the TASM also have a section of technical file, which is a risk management measure. That was a very, very important section of the framework, which talk about how this framework can be the turning point before the product can be launched in EUA. Need to be comply with EUA Act. So what I did here is I embed the TASM in the model technical file, and then I demonstrate the auditor about every annexures and with annexure 3 threats, which is corresponding safeguard. And then what I did is I use a TASM as a live long, post market monitoring under the Article 61, and boom, I got the clearance. And Ross, what the major part TASM has addressed in this case, the most important part is public LLM interference. This called inference APIs. So we have a public LLM inference API. So we have a thread with public inference LLM is prompt injections, and safeguard is input sanitizations and all that. And it is definitely need to be mapped with map and manage. So EUA Act also talk about this annexure 4 technical file and all that. And this is how I use this TASM framework to address that issue, because you already document the prompt injection, data poisoning, and model theft and all that. So I really appreciate and kudos to you the time you have spent on that framework and build it so well that it can meet all the solutions and the regulations part.
That's
And
really
truly
cool.
appreciate.
I like that. And here's the other thing that I will say. If you're someone like me who says, "Oh, I want to learn something or I want to see it," and then you look and you're like, "Oh my gosh, it's a 200-page NIST document. Who's
It's not
got time to
possible.
read that?" Right? Or it's, buried within, these boring policy documents that, written by lawyers and someone that you can't even understand that language sometimes. This is a simple one-page PowerPoint, right?
Exactly.
And then you have another page for your metrics that you build. So if you want to like simplify how you protect your company from material threats, take a look at the OWASP threat and safeguard matrix. I guarantee it's going to help you.
And we have to keep it simple. So
Yeah.
so do you have any recommendation if I want to if you talk about a single KPI, key performance indicator, that shows the executive AI risk is going down? So what should be the one KPI which shows the executive that yes, these are the AI risk is going down, because they don't
So
have a time. Yeah.
what I would want to do is have some type of maybe business impact analysis document.
Hmm.
And I'll just say, think of it this way. If you have a team of a data privacy officer, a CISO, and a chief compliance officer,
Hmm.
that anytime there's a new application or a major application rewrite or change, it has to go to that organization. They look at it and they say, okay, tell me what you're doing. And you go in and you say, oh, we're building an LLM that has this AI capability.
Okay. Yeah.
Just having that impact analysis is probably going to trigger the right discussions where the CISO is going to say, you know what, we probably ought to throw this into our bug bounty and pen test program just to ensure it's good. And then the compliance officer is going to say, hey, you know what, this is using data from Europe, so we got to make sure that it's stored this way. So I would maybe just look at a simple thing that says what percentage of our applications had a business impact analysis as a simple way to show we have governance around AI. Does that mean we're perfect? Absolutely not. But I think it would be triggering the right types of follow-on conversations to get the right people informed and working on the right problems.
And that is the reason, when we're talking about, but if you take example of the one KPI you want to share, do you recommend any one KPI?
I don't know if there's one KPI because it really comes down to what specific risk am I stopping,
Okay.
right? Am I worried about sensitive data leaks? Am I worried about using malicious open source from different companies? Am I worried about
Yeah.
hallucinations? Am I worried about data overexposure, AI misuse, unethical AI recommendations, or bias? All of these things probably have a different metric. So I
True.
can't say there's one metric because, like I said, I would use a different metric for these things. So I think you have to figure out what are the top material risks that you want to stop in your company,
Hmm.
and then build a separate metric for each of them that you can report on a monthly, quarterly time frame back to the executive leadership team so that they can say, hey, Ross really cares about this risk. Here's how much he has seen us progressing the right way, based on trends, based on total coverage, based on improvements to show that we're securing this the right way.
And if you take one sample, let's take one example of you. I want to build a KPI to demonstrate we have a AI risk. Like, after
Mhm.
implementing this framework controls and all that, we able to reduce 30% risk. And also, can we have one walkthrough which can give a good insight to the aspiring CISOs who watching this podcast? How to build
Yeah,
KPIs? Yeah.
so let's just take a couple of things. I might first start with a configuration management database or asset inventory. And I would say, how many applications do we have in our company? And let's just make up a number and say, well, oh, we have 300 applications in our company. Cool. Now I'm going to have another little field in there that say, how many applications use AI capabilities? A little checkbox, yes or no. And so out of those 300, maybe I see that I got 70 applications which are using AI for our organization. Okay, got it. So now I got to do some type of additional AI scans or AI checks around this system. And then, maybe you're doing pen tests, maybe you're doing vulnerability assessments, maybe you're doing threat models, whatever it is, you're going to have findings, right? And now what you need to do is for any finding, you probably have to have a target remediation date, which should be definitely less than a year,
Mm.
right? So it might be a month, it may take 6 months, depending on how long it takes to fix the code or whatever it is. And so what I would do is I maybe would have a metric that says, how many open AI vulnerabilities are we fixing? And then I would probably have, some type of thing that says, hey, are they past due? Like if I expected this to be fixed in 60 days and it's now at 90 days, that's past due. I care about those more than I actually care about the ones that are, within the normal patch timeline, like any risk you would remediate. And so those would be the things I would look for, these expired or overdue risks of AI vulnerabilities that are past due. And then every month, how does that number trend? Is it
Mm.
going up? Is it staying the same? Or is it getting better? Right. So if that risk is going up or getting worse, in this example, I need to dig into it to say, well, why is that happening? Do I not have the people to fix this? Do I need to do something else because maybe my people were all incentivized on building new features, but nobody's incentivized on patching and fixing vulnerabilities. They just
True.
don't get promoted that way.
True.
So those are the types of things I would want to see in my metrics programs to figure out maybe I need to change the performance bonuses. So maybe for 2026, the way developers get and their IT managers get their bonuses is tied on to how many vulnerabilities they have. Things
Mm.
like that, where I start to look at how one metric can be influenced, can be incentivized, can be gamified, I think is really how you move the needle to drive a particular outcome.
Excellent. And that was the key point when you're talking about the patching and all that, which delay the things. I think that can be a good numbers to show the business impact and all that. And an excellent that was an excellent insight I like about that case study. And with following on this is the last question I want to ask is what is your career advice for the skill future CISO must learn in terms of trend about AI? What you can see, like, what is the skill they need to learn. I know there's a lot of certifications we have, CISSP, AIGP, CIPP, whatever, but from an AI perspective, what should be the upskill for the CISOs?
I think CISO should first understand what is the business case for how AI is going to improve productivity. Usually
Hmm.
it means we're going to make something cheaper, faster, better. They need to understand the why. The
Hmm.
second thing I would say is what technologies are we going to use to adopt said thing? Are we going to build it all in Salesforce? Are we going to build custom MCPs? Are we going to use agents in Claude? What are the technologies that are there? And you're not going to be an expert, and this stuff is going to change. But once you understand, here are the four foundational technologies we're going to make an improvement in our organization, then I
Mhm.
would say, well, how am I going to make sure my people are really smart on those technologies? Do I
Okay.
send them to training? Do I, push this type of compliance tool that polices it for me? What am I going to do? Because it's great that my developers are all using the latest whatever tech, but it's more important that they're using the greatest tech securely. And I don't know if it's secure until I have a smart person who understands that technology to really think from the security objectives and points of view. So I would look to understand those things, where the business wants to go, what the technologies need to be. And then after that, I would assign accountable owners. Let's say here's the security architect who's responsible for that, and say, tell me what I need to know and learn from that individual.
Excellent. But thanks, Ross. And when you're talking about the insight on the part of, you said the business productivity and all that, that was my next content I'm going to make. And thanks for that. Because that's a very good use case you said about, because see, a lot of speakers say, okay, based on the business you can do. No, based on a business case, based on a mission and vision of the company, what kind of an application they're using. And that give the good clarity to the CISOs and CIOs, I'm sure for that. So Ross, before we wind up this particular podcast, what is the last important point you want to share with the viewers about the Gen AI or the TASM framework?
Well, I would just maybe continue on that last conversation just a little
Yeah.
bit
Yeah.
of there's always a desire to do new technologies,
Hmm.
right? And just think of some technologies we were talking about and super excited a couple years ago that didn't really play out. And I'll just give you a couple example of, hey, everything needs to be on the blockchain. And then there was a
Hmm.
focus, are we going to put all the databases on the blockchain? We didn't really see that take off as much as we wanted. Or another example, virtual worlds. Hey, I'm not going to sell you on a website. You're going to wear some really cool goggles, and then you're going to go in this AI, simulated environment, uh, and then you're going to go to a virtual store instead of going to the physical store. That technology didn't really play out. So I think we really need to go back to say, show me the true business value and upside. Because if
Excellent.
we add any new technology, we always add risk. And I'm happy to accept new risks, but I want to make sure the business upside is really there. And if it's really there, then we'll find a way to secure it. But if it's not, you're going to waste a lot of time on security for something that doesn't really move the needle on the revenue. And so I think that's a huge piece of where we have to think about from a cyber, from a compliance perspective going forward. And hopefully the OWASP threat and safeguard matrix is something that you can use to help your organization. And if you want to learn more, definitely reach out to me. I'm pretty available on LinkedIn to talk about it.
And I can share your LinkedIn profile in the description of the video. And you are a big shot in social media, so we don't need any introduction. But uh, I will definitely share your profile on the YouTube description box. I hope that is fine with everyone.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks. Thank you, Ross. Thank you so much for taking out the time and sharing the insight on the Gen AI security and TASM framework. And I'm sure this podcast will give a lot of value to the viewers who basically implementing AI in their organizations. And I'm sure the framework that you have built, TASM framework, can be a game changer.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure and wish you only the best. And thanks again for having me on the podcast.
Thank you, Ross. And thank Ross. I always ask this question. Can I disturb you again for another podcast based on the demand from the viewers? Something around on agentic security and all that in next 3 6 months, something like that. Can I disturb you
Yeah,
again for?
I'm always happy to come back and speak and help people going forward. And hopefully, I'm smart enough to answer the questions going forward, I guess.
I got a lot of insight, Ross, and definitely I got some work for next 1 month, and I'm going to work on it.
Awesome. And you got to share with me some of the things you've used. I can't wait to see your implementation that you've used
Definitely,
the threat and safeguard matrix. It'd be great to open
definitely.
source with the community.
Definitely. We're just going through the testing phase. Once it is basically get finalized, I will definitely share with you, and I'm sure you will also love that project.
Amazing.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for taking out the time. And this is all from our side, team. It was a great platform where Ross has shared the great insights, and we really thankful to Ross to share his insight on this podcast. This is all from our side. Do let us know how do you find this podcast. I'm sure it will be amazing. And if you're new to the channel, do subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss the future videos on a similar topic. Thank you, Ross. Thank you so much for the great insight, and thanks for taking time.
Have a great day,
Have a nice
everyone.
day. Good day.